You probably see the Sahara as an endless, lifeless sandbox. Yellow dunes, a scorching sun, maybe a few tired camels in the distance, nothing more. That is the biggest lie in geography. Beneath millions of tons of burning sand lie not just rocks, there are the riverbeds of vanished giants, the ruins of empires we have no name for, the bones of monsters that ruled this planet long before the first dinosaur opened its eyes. The Sahara is not a wasteland, it is a vault, and we have only just started picking the lock. This desert covers 9.2 million square kilometers. Drop it on a map of the United States and it would swallow the country whole. The most frightening thing about this sand is how it behaves. It works like time. It can hide evidence for thousands of years. Caravans walked into the Sahara searching for the legendary city of gold. They never walked back out. What science has pulled from the dunes is stranger than any legend. Today we are going beneath the surface to see what the sand has been hiding. From a stone calendar older than Stonehenge to an ocean that boiled in a single second. The first thing we found is 600 kilometers from the nearest sea. It has 18-meter skeletons, and those skeletons have legs. Chapter 1. The Whale That Walked. In the autumn of 1902, a team of geologists walked into a dry valley 150 kilometers southwest of Cairo. What they pulled out of the sand made no sense. A vertebra the size of a dinner plate, a jawbone 2 meters long, ribs as tall as a man. Within weeks, they had documented hundreds of skeletons across the valley floor. These were not dinosaurs, these were whales, some of them 18 meters long. The body of a 6-story building lying on its side in burning sand. The local Bedouins had a name for the place, Wadi al-Hitan, the Valley of Whales. They had walked past these bones for generations, no theory fit. Because the whales had legs, not flippers, tiny back legs, with knees, with ankles, with toes, far too small to support a body the length of a bus on land, but unmistakably legs. These were Basilosaurus, apex predators that ruled the seas 40 million years ago. In their fossilized stomach contents, paleontologists found sharks and large turtles. They were the top of the food chain. And those small, useless legs were a memory. Whales had once walked. 40 million years ago, they were land animals. Then, slowly, generation by generation, they walked back into the water. The legs shrank. The body lengthened. They vanished beneath the waves. But the legs did not disappear all at once. Wadi al-Hitan caught them in the act. So how did they end up under the desert? 40 million years ago, North Africa did not exist. In its place sat the ancient Tethys Sea. Warm, shallow, tropical. Then Africa drifted north. It collided with Europe. The seabed buckled, lifted, rose into the air. The Tethys retreated. Wind turned the seabed into dunes. The sand on top of the Sahara is the dust of that vanished ocean. Walk Wadi al-Hitan at dawn. Under your boots, you are not crossing a desert, you are crossing a beach. The corals are still there. The whale bones are still there. The Sahara was an ocean. The ocean simply left. Chapter 2. The Garden That Burned. 1,300 kilometers west, in southern Algeria, there is a plateau called Tassili Niger. From the air, it looks like a stone forest of sandstone towers, narrow canyons, twisting valleys. In 1933, a French lieutenant named Brennans was patrolling the territory on camelback. The midday sun was unbearable. He took shelter in the shadow of a canyon wall. He looked up, and the stone was looking back. The walls were covered with paintings, detailed, colored, tens of thousands of figures, hunters with bows, herds of cattle, giraffes, hippopotamuses swimming in deep water. Reed boats with people on board, paddling across a place that today has not a drop of moisture for hundreds of kilometers. Scholars eventually documented over 15,000 drawings here, 72,000 square kilometers of open-air gallery. The strangest paintings were the ones the lieutenant did not understand. Among the hunters and the swimming hippos were figures that did not look human. Some stood 6 meters tall. Their heads were perfectly round, they had no faces. Sometimes they wore what looked like helmets and antennas. They floated above smaller human figures who were reaching their arms upward. The French archaeologist Henri Lot, who led an expedition here in the 1950s, called these the Roundheads. The largest of them, at a place called Sahar, he named the Great God of Sahar. The internet had a different theory. These were astronauts, aliens who came down from the sky. The truth, when scientists drilled into the floor of dried-up lakes and pulled up cores of ancient pollen, was stranger than the alien story. The Sahara is a climate pendulum. The Earth wobbles slowly on its axis. Every 26,000 years, the belt of tropical rains shifts north. From 10,000 to 5,000 years ago, the Sahara was a savanna, comparable to modern Tanzania. Rivers ran through it. In the central basin sat Lake Megachad, a freshwater inland sea larger than the Caspian. People lived here. They herded cattle, they painted. About 5,000 years ago, the pendulum swung back. The rains stopped. The rivers became dust. The lake evaporated. Late Tassili paintings show people killing each other for the last puddles of water. The survivors walked east toward the only river that did not dry up, the Nile. Some historians believe this flood of climate refugees helped create Egyptian civilization, the pyramids, the pharaohs. An attempt to remember a garden that had to be left behind. The pendulum has not stopped. The Sahara will be green again. The painters will not be there to see it. Chapter 3. The Stones That Counted Years. 800 kilometers south of Cairo, near Abu Simbel, lies a flat, dry pan called Nabta Playa. For thousands of years, it was a featureless stretch of sand. In the autumn of 1973, an American archaeologist named Fred Windorf was driving across the Nubian Desert with his Polish colleague Romuald Schild. They stopped to stretch their legs. They walked a few hundred meters from the truck. The stones were not random. They were arranged. A small circle of standing stones, 4 meters in diameter. Some oriented along clear lines, others laid flat. Nabta Playa was a settlement that began around 7,500 BC. The stone circle was constructed in the 5th millennium BC, older than Stonehenge by almost 1,000 years. Older than the pyramids by more than 1,000. The shaped megaliths weighed up to 1.5 tons each. The builders were nomadic cattle herders. They came every wet season when seasonal rains turned this corner of the Sahara into a temporary lake. They held ceremonies. They buried entire cows in roofed clay chambers with stones the size of refrigerators sealing them shut. The cow was not just food, it was a god. When archaeoastronomer J. McKim Malville studied the alignment in the 1990s, he discovered that one axis pointed precisely at the rising sun on the summer solstice, the day the rains would begin, the day life returned to the desert. This was a calendar carved into stone 6,500 years ago. Researchers have proposed that other axes align with bright stars, Sirius, the belt of Orion. There is debate about how many of those alignments were intentional, but the solstice line is unmistakable. The herders of Nabta Playa knew when the rains would arrive, the way modern farmers know it from satellite forecasts. They had no writing, no wheels, they had stones, patience, and a sky. Around 4,500 BC, the lake shrank. The herders walked east toward the Nile. Some scholars suggest the symbolism they carried, the cattle worship, the alignment of monuments to the heavens, became part of the religious foundation of pharaonic Egypt. The original stones were eventually moved to the Nubian Museum in Aswan to protect them from vandalism. A replica stands at the original site. You can visit either one, but the real instrument is the sky above your head. It still works. Chapter 4. The Glass That Fell From Nowhere. In November of 1922, the British archaeologist Howard Carter held a candle through a sealed wall in the Valley of the Kings and looked into the tomb of Tutankhamun. What he saw, he described as wonderful things: gold, statues, The intact mummy of a teenage pharaoh. Among the jewelry on the body was a pectoral. At its center sat a beetle, the sacred scarab, Egyptian symbol of rebirth. Carter thought the scarab was carved from chalcedony, a translucent quartz. Decades later, when mineralogists ran a precise chemical analysis, they discovered something else. It was not chalcedony, it was glass. A pure lemon yellow desert glass found nowhere else on Earth except in the Libyan Desert, 650 kilometers away. That was strange enough, but the bigger mystery was how the glass got to the desert at all. To turn ordinary Saharan sand into pure transparent glass, you have to heat it suddenly, to at least 1650 degrees Celsius. Not a forest fire, not a volcano. Lava is colder by half. Scientists looked for an impact crater. There is no crater. 250,000 square kilometers of Libyan desert have been mapped, surveyed, scanned with satellites. There is no impact crater that could account for melted sand spread across an area the size of a small country. The answer, when supercomputer simulations finally reproduced the event, was an airburst. About 29 million years ago, an asteroid entered Earth's atmosphere over what is now the Egypt-Libya border. The object was traveling so fast that it never reached the ground. A few kilometers above the desert, it exploded. In that moment, the sky split open. A second sun appeared, briefly, hotter than the surface of any volcano. The thermal pulse reached the ground in fractions of a second. Across hundreds of kilometers, the surface of the desert flashed into liquid. Dunes momentarily became rivers of glowing molten quartz. Then it cooled. The glass cracked. The wind buried it. And for 29 million years, fragments of that single second of fire have been waiting on the surface of the Libyan desert. 3,000 years ago, a craftsman in the workshop of Tutankhamun picked one up and carved it into a scarab. The Egyptians believed this glass was the trapped light of the sun god Ra. They were not entirely wrong. The pharaoh wore an explosion on his chest. He carried it into the afterlife. Chapter 5. The Eye That Was Never an Eye. In June of 1965, 2 American astronauts climbed into a small capsule on top of a Titan rocket, James McDivitt and Edward White, Gemini 4. When they passed over the Western Sahara in the airspace of Mauritania, White looked through his window. By his own description, his breath caught. In the middle of a flat, lifeless plateau, the planet was looking back at him. A perfect geometric eye, 3 concentric rings, 40 kilometers wide. You could not see this from an airplane. You could not see it from the ground. Only from orbit did the design appear. When the photographs were printed in newspapers, conspiracy theorists around the world began to celebrate. We have found her, Atlantis. The unsettling thing was how plausible the numbers sounded. Plato, the Greek philosopher who first wrote about Atlantis, described its capital as a city surrounded by 3 rings of water and 2 rings of land. Look at a satellite image of the reshot structure. The rings are there. Even the diameter Plato gave, when converted into modern kilometers, falls almost exactly within the dimensions of the eye. The internet exploded. A nuclear war crater, an alien landing site, a portal to a parallel world. But geologists had been studying the structure since the 1930s. The French naturalist Théodore Monod led an expedition there in 1952, more than a decade before the astronauts saw it from above. The truth he assembled was not as exciting as Atlantis. A giant bubble of magma, hundreds of millions of years ago, began to push up from inside the Earth. It lifted the layers of rock above it like an enormous blister, but the volcano never erupted. The magma cooled and froze underground. For 100 million years, erosion stripped the dome layer by layer. Different kinds of rock erode at different speeds. The harder bands stayed standing as ridges. The softer bands eroded into valleys. What was left was a perfect cross-section of the Earth's crust, 3 concentric rings of resistant rock separated by the eroded valleys of weaker stone. Not a city built by gods, a textbook of geology opened by the wind. The Eye of the Sahara is not hiding the lost capital of an advanced civilization. It is showing you the ribs of the planet itself. The most famous mystery of the Sahara is not a mystery. It is a cross-section, 40 kilometers wide, older than every word you have ever read. Chapter 6. The Empire That Drank Its Own Future. In 2011, a team of British archaeologists led by David Mattingly pointed satellites at the southern Libyan Desert in the region known as Fezzan. They were looking for fortifications from fragmentary Roman sources. The satellites returned images that took a moment to understand. Beneath the sand were the outlines of more than 100 fortified towns. Square, linear, geometric. Foundations of houses, streets, shadows of irrigation channels. These were the Garamantes. The Romans had called them barbarians. The Romans had been wrong. The Garamantes were settled by at least 1000 BC. Their territory covered 180,000 square kilometers. Their largest city, Garama, held about 4,000 people inside the walls. They had a written language, Tifinagh, related to alphabets the Tuareg use today. Iron metallurgy, chariots, two-story houses, and paved streets, at a time when much of Europe was scratching for shelter under thatched roofs. But one question puzzled them. The Garamantes lived in the absolute middle of the Sahara. Where did they get their water? The answer was buried under their feet. They built Faggara, hand-cut tunnels in solid rock. A vertical shaft is dug down to underground water. From there, a horizontal tunnel is cut, sloping gently downward, sometimes for tens of kilometers. The water travels by gravity until it surfaces exactly where the farmer wants it. No pumps, no engines, just patience, and an exact understanding of the angle of the Earth. The Faggara networks the Garamantes mapped exceed 2,000 kilometers in total length, the equivalent of every line of every subway system in modern New York, dug by hand in the heart of a burning desert. It was an engineering miracle. It was also a trap. The water was not flowing, it was fossil. It had taken hundreds of thousands of years to accumulate when the Sahara was still green. They were drinking from a savings account that had taken epochs to fill. For 1,000 years this worked. The empire grew. The aquifer level fell. The Faggara had to be cut deeper, longer, more complex. By the 5th century AD, the system became impossible to maintain. Aridity finished what the engineering could not. Trade routes shifted. The cities emptied. The Garamantes were gone. The sand returned. The towns disappeared beneath dunes. For 1,500 years, no one remembered there had ever been an empire here. Then the satellites looked down. They lived on credit. The water they had found had taken thousands of years to collect, and they drank it all. Chapter 7. The Ocean Beneath. The strangest fact about the Sahara is that the Garamantes did not, in the end, run out of water. The water is still there. In the middle of the 20th century, geologists were drilling for oil in the Libyan Desert. What came back up was not crude. It was clean, cold, fresh water from the driest place on Earth. They drilled more wells. The scale became clear. The Nubian Sandstone Aquifer. 2 million square kilometers of underground rock spanning Egypt, Libya, Sudan, and Chad. Inside that rock, 150,000 cubic kilometers of fresh water, enough to flood Germany and France together. The water itself was old. Isotope dating revealed two main periods of recharge, one around 38,000 years ago, another at 361,000 years ago. The water was last topped up when Neanderthals were still alive in Europe. Modern rainfall does not refill it. The aquifer is fossil. In 1984, the Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi launched what he called the eighth wonder of the world, the Great Man-Made River. Over 2,800 kilometers of pipeline, more than 1,300 wells, 6.5 million cubic meters pumped out of the desert daily, sent to the cities along the coast. But one detail is rarely printed on the pipeline maps. Extraction is roughly 2.5 cubic kilometers a year. Recharge is essentially zero. The aquifer is a battery, finite, discharging. Hydrologists disagree on how long it will last. Some say 1,000 years, others 60 to 100. No one knows. The answer does not matter. We have done this before. The Garamantes tapped fossil water. They expanded cities on a supply that did not refill. They believed the system was stable. The Garamantes are now an outline in a satellite photograph. We have built a bigger version. We extract at a rate they could not imagine. We are the new Garamantes. The pendulum will swing again. Earth Black Box. Look at what this desert holds. The skeleton of a whale that walked. The painting of a hippopotamus where there is now only sand. a stone that knew when the rains would come. A jewel made of fire that fell from the sky. A geometric eye visible only from orbit, the footprints of an empire that drank its own future, an ocean of fresh water draining with each year, 7 secrets, filed layer by layer under burning sand. The Sahara is not a wasteland, it is a black box. It records what the planet no longer needs on the surface, and one lesson, written over and over in every layer. Nothing was promised permanence. The mountains rise and fall, the pendulum swings, and what is desert today was paradise yesterday. The Sahara is still feeding life. Each year, Saharan dust drifts across the Atlantic to the Amazon rainforest. The minerals feed the trees. The desert that was once an ocean is fertilizing the lungs of the planet. Nothing truly disappears here. It changes form. It waits, sometimes for 40 million years, until the next eyes are ready to read it. You have been watching Earth Black Box, the records the planet never meant to lose. Keep digging.